Welcome to part 2 of the marriage workshop or Shalom Bayit workshop led by Dr. Mark and Dr. Linda Saffer. And once again, I want to express our appreciation to them for taking out time from their very, very busy practice to be able to share a lot of their wisdom with us over these 4 weeks. Tonight's session is all about communication. There are 3 things that you need to have in order to have a successful marriage: communication, communication, and communication. As long as 2 people can communicate in a healthy way, they can learn how to relate to each other and have a meaningful relationship. Most of the time, a breakdown in relationship occurs when there's a breakdown in relationship, either because the method of communication is there, but it's done with a lack of respect, a lack of consideration, a lack of sensitivity for the other's feelings, or there's a lack of communication. You know, we have a lot of narratives of couples in the parshiot that we're reading during this time of year. And one might think that one of the failings of some of the couples of our avos and imahos is communication. I'll give you just a couple of examples. Hashem told Avraham, you and Sarah are going to have a child. His name is going to be Yitzchak. Did Avraham ever tell Sarah? I mean, I know that I neglect to tell my wife who's coming for Shabbos. So that's enough of a reason for her to get a little bit, and rightfully so, a little bit, you could tell me, if you know. And I just say, sweetheart, I wasn't thinking and I just forgot. But if Hashem came to me and told me that we're going to have a child, don't you think that that would have been a proper thing to want to communicate? And yet, Avram does not communicate this with Sarah, and that's why the first time she hears about it is not through her husband, who had heard this message from Hashem, but was from the 3 visitors that had come to Avraham's tent after the circumcision. Another example is what we're going to read in this week's parsha. It says that when Rivka heard that Yitzchak wanted to give the blessings to his firstborn son, to Esav, she immediately came up with this elaborate ruse in order to deceive her husband, who was blind, and to figure out a way for, instead of Esav getting the blessings, that Yaakov would get the blessings instead. Now, the reason why she did this is because she had heard from a prophet who had told her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, you have 2 distinct nations, they're not going to be able to coexist. And therefore, the future of what we call the Jewish people is going to come from Yaakov and not from Esav. Now, wouldn't you think that would have been a very simple thing for her to communicate with her husband Yitzchak? She didn't bother to tell him, and for whatever reason she felt that I'm not able to tell him directly, and instead I have to come up with an elaborate ruse to deceive my husband in order that my son Yaakov will end up getting the blessings. So one might look at those 2 isolated stories, and there are other stories as well about failure to communicate, and conclude that communication is not such a big thing when it comes to these seemingly aloof people that happen to be in this relationship. But the reality is that those are not good examples, because what is unique about those 2 examples is that the information that one of the spouses had, in the first case it was the husband who had the information, in the second case it was the wife who had the information came from a divine source, it came from Hashem. And a prophet who is privy to prophecy is also entrusted with the secret from Hashem, which sometimes has to be even withheld from a spouse. And it's almost like God has client-lawyer privilege with whoever he's providing prophecy to. If Hashem tells a prophet something, and Hashem does not specifically tell that person, reveal this to others, then it's a very private prophecy, and the prophet does not have permission to share it with others. So the first thing you learn about communication is that when you have a secret, your husband or wife does not automatically become entitled to be shared that secret with if it involves someone else who you would know would be hurt if the spouse were to find out about that secret. But there are other examples in Tanakh where communication is key. And you have the story also a couple of weeks ago where Sarah, in a very selfless move, realizing that she's not going to be able to have children, tells her husband, go ahead, take my handmaid Hagar and have children from her. And Avraham marries Hagar. She immediately becomes pregnant. And the Torah says, Vatekal givirta be'eineha. She immediately started to become condescending towards Sarah, feeling that if Sarah really was so special as she originally thought she was, how come I got pregnant right away and Sarah's been waiting all of these years? Sarah, realizing that this is very destructive for her relationship with her husband, one day turns to her clueless husband, and that's the origin of clueless Jewish husbands, because she tells Avraham, she says, don't you see what's going on right under your nose? And she says, Chamasi alecha, I have this tremendous grievance against you, because here Hagar is treating me in a very condescending way, and you're not doing anything about it. And Avram's response was, what is it? This has got nothing. You're the one who told me she's your handmaid. I didn't know. All right, besides the classic excuse, many times I feel like Avram in that situation. But the point is that here is Sarah communicating in a healthy way and saying to Avram, you're not standing up for me. You're not acting as my defender. You're not acting as a husband is supposed to act. And I want us to be able to repair that breach that has been created. And the only way that that can happen is through healthy communication. So those are some of the background of how communication is communicated to us in the Torah. But now the Saffers are going to give us some really, really practical advice about what communication is really all about in a marriage. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we are going to talk about communication, and not to talk about communication. We'll do that, but we're going to actually communicate. Linda will be leading some exercises where you can actually communicate with each other. That's the fun part. So let's begin with a short recap from last week. This is also for those unfortunate people who missed last week. The main idea that we wanted to get through, that we wanted you to take away with you from last week, oh, here it is. The idea
That's next week's session.
That's next week's session, right? The idea of the why. I said last week, I drew these circles, and we learned last week that the best way of succeeding is to start with a why, keeping in mind why you're doing something, while you're doing something. And as you move to the how, it's going to be easier if you remember the why and what I have to do in order to achieve the why. We want to keep the why in mind. So we're here tonight. Why? I guess because we want a better marriage. But I asked you last week to go one step backwards. Why do you want a marriage? Why do we want to be in a marriage? Why did we get into it in the first place? And for many of us, the answer does boil down to, I didn't want to be alone. I wanted somebody to share my life with. I wanted an attachment with somebody. And I tried to convince you last week that even if for you it wasn't the original reason to get married, it's a good reason to be married. Maybe the best reason to be married. And it's a great reason to stay married. And it's a fantastic reason to keep in mind while you learn how to make your marriage wonderful. So, can we go on from now with the assumption that everyone in this room feels that they would like a bond, an attachment with somebody? And since you're here with a someone, I guess you're attached to that someone. Well, some of you. And you want to make that attachment secure so that you feel safe with that someone sitting next to you. And don't forget, we defined attachment as a long-term, warm, loving bond that gives you support when you need it and shelter from the storm. We're trying to help you to be that for each other. So the why is, I want a secure attachment. And the how is what we need to do in order to make that why happen. Is everybody with me on that? Okay. So tonight is about a communication. That actually is tonight's how. But as I said, it's important in any how or any technique that you learn, we spoke last week about davening, for example, to keep in mind the why. So the question then becomes, how am I going to go through life and keep this why in mind as often as I can? My wife says something to me, and I'm going to say something back. But before it comes out of my mouth, I have to think. My response to her must go through a censor, must go through a filter. Is my answer to her going to be good for the attachment between us? Because if the answer is no, then, and it's not going to be good for the attachment, the bond between Linda and I, then I better bite my tongue and I better find a different answer. Something that's conducive to the bond between us. That means I have to be looking inside my head all the time, watching every word I want to say before it comes out of my mouth. Now, I'm sure some people think that that's really difficult, but it is possible. Remember last week we did the exercise where we looked at the flower as if we'd never seen a flower before. And then I asked you to look at your spouse's face as if you've never seen your spouse's face before. That was looking at something outside of you. The flower, the face. Now I'm asking you to look at something inside of you. Your thoughts. And what you want to say before you say it. Imagine it. Do it right now. Imagine you're standing outside of your mind and you're looking at your thoughts and feelings from the outside, as if you're looking through a camera into your mind and seeing what you're thinking and what you're feeling. There's another way you can think about it. Think of it this way. You're a bus driver and you're driving your bus, and there are a whole pile of noisy passengers that are sitting in the seats behind you. And they're all yelling at you which way they want you to turn. But you're the driver. You have the choice which passenger you're going to listen to and which you're going to ignore. Okay, so if one of the passengers is screaming to you, go left. But you have decided, the CEO up there, the big boss that's thinking, you have decided, no, the best thing for my marriage is to go to the right, not what this passenger tells me to go to the left. Then I can go to the right. I don't have to listen to that passenger. The passengers are actually our thoughts and our feelings. We don't have to listen to them. We are in charge of the bus. That's one way of looking at it. So when we're communicating with our spouse, we should, as much as possible, never say the first thing that comes to mind. It's dangerous. Does this mean being not natural, not being myself? Does that sound strange to you? I can't be myself. But being myself, being natural, is what gets my marriage sometimes into the bad situation that it is in today. Okay, so I have to act differently. I cannot be my natural self. Is that clear? Are there any questions about that? Okay, good. So here is the best way of communicating when, say for example, your spouse does something that affects you and you want to let them know. Your natural instinct wants you to say things like, why did you do that? Or, you hurt me by saying that in front of the guests. Or, you really make me angry when you walk away in an argument. You don't love me. You don't care about me. And then it escalates. And we make an attack on our spouse's character. You're disgusting. You're thoughtless. You're it starts with a B. There's a male version and a female version. You're a nasty piece of work. Some of you might even go to the extreme of, I hate you. That also happens. Don't nod your heads. But inside are you thinking, some of that does feel familiar. And are those statements constructive? Do they actually bring us closer? No. They just leave the other person in a state where they have one of three responses. Fight, flight, or freeze. They'll either fight back, they'll insult you back, or they'll flee to another room. They'll stonewall you. Or they'll freeze. They'll stand there utterly paralyzed, feeling helpless and hopeless. Those are their responses. So the alternative to this horrible statement, horrible situation, is simple. Instead of all those statements that are made, the answer is the famous, got it? I message. I'm sure lots of you have heard about it. Let's talk about it. Instead of, you hurt me when you said that. With an I message, it becomes, I felt hurt when you said that. You see the difference? Instead of, you really make me angry when you walk away in the middle of an argument, it becomes, I feel angry when you walk away in the middle of an argument. No, that actually is not constructive. The best way is not, I feel angry, but I feel hurt inside when you dismiss me, when you stonewall me. Because remember I said in our first session, what is anger? Anger is most often a protest that the attachment between us is being threatened. It's being frayed. So if that's the case, what do you think your feelings really are when your spouse walks away from an argument or a discussion? Any ideas rather than anger? Anybody brave enough to venture?
Abandonment.
Abandonment, sure, very much so. Aloneness. Disappointed, frightened, anxious. Does it ring a bell? So that's the one, that feeling is the one I should tell my partner. I feel abandoned, alone, when you walk out, or when you don't hear me, or when you stonewall me. That's the true feeling behind the anger. Now there's something else. We want a feeling word. I feel, and then a feeling word. Because my spouse can't argue with that. If I say, I feel upset, well, she can't tell me, you shouldn't feel that way. But I do. That's my feeling. You can't take that away from me. Don't tell me what I should feel and shouldn't feel. You can't tell me that my feelings are wrong. They're my feelings. It's the way I feel. When you say it the other way, if you say, I feel that, then, I feel that you don't care. Then I'm going to argue with you. But I do care. Look at all the ways that I've shown you that I care. But if you say, I feel abandoned, hey, that's very different from saying that. So you leave out the word that. I feel like you don't care. And you give it just a feeling word. I feel abandoned, I feel upset, I feel frustrated, I feel hurt. because I can't argue with that. So that's the first step in good communication. I feel, and then a vulnerable, non-aggressive feeling. I feel hurt, vulnerable, abandoned, lonely, etc. Now, what's the next step? That's the first step in good communication. What's the next step? I have to respond to your telling me your feeling. The first thing I have to do is I have to recognize what it is that you're feeling. I must know it. I must put myself in the other person's shoes, in your shoes, and try my hardest to feel what you're feeling. To get under your skin and feel what you're feeling, leaving myself out of the picture. That means I say to myself, if I say that I don't understand how you feel that, then I'm still looking through my eyes. If I say I don't understand how you can feel that way. If I really don't understand what you're feeling, maybe I have to ask other questions. Like, can you please explain it differently? But I want to see it from your point of view, not from my point of view. This is actually what we call the famous word empathy. That is empathy. Feeling what your spouse feels, or if you can't, then trying your best to imagine what it must be like for your spouse. Empathy has two parts. The first part is recognizing what your spouse feels. The second part is telling them that you recognize what they feel, and you know what they feel, and you understand how things must feel for them from their point of view, and not contaminating it from your own point of view. You with me on that? There's a simple rule here. When you respond to your spouse when they tell you that they're feeling, or tell you what they're feeling, your empathy, what I've said there, has to take up your understanding, your acknowledging, your putting yourself in their shoes, has to take up 95% of your answer, of your response. Only when you've done that 95%, then you're allowed to add the other 5%. The part that I call the and. We used to call it the but I think that it's much better word is and. So the and could be like, and I never intended to hurt you. And did you consider another possibility? Not but did you consider another possibility, but and did you consider another possibility? Sometimes the and part does need an apology. I'm sorry I lost my temper. Sometimes the and part needs a different empathetic sorry. And then an and. I'm sorry that you feel that way. And I had no real intention of hurting you. And I understand how you would feel that way and why you would feel that way. And could you perhaps accept it was a miscommunication between us? I thought we were meeting in Dubrovnik, and you thought we were meeting in Barcelona. I'm sorry. Linda has a live exercise for us now. Linda.
So tonight's a lot more serious than last week, isn't it? Anyhow, can you hear me there at the back? Okay. And what I want to start off with saying is that the stuff that we're telling you these few weeks is not just psychobabble. There's actually scientific proof through functional MRIs that can be attached to the brain to show that when we're feeling something, we're using the amygdala side of the brain. And when we're thinking about it and how we're going to express it, we are using the prefrontal cortex. So science is catching up with Torah and with psychology. So on that note, now we're going to do the experiential parts. We need notes, unlike the talented rabbi. So I'm going to ask the men firstly to think about the last few weeks. Think of an interaction with your wives that was maybe uncomfortable for you. For example, if she yells at you for returning home late. Now, I'd like to go through the incident again. I'd like you to go through the incident again, using the script that Mark's been talking about and the handouts that you all have, I hope. Do you all have handouts? Did you put the handouts on the tables? So before we begin, again, I'd like to remind you that anger is almost always a secondary response. It's only a response. Try to find and express the underlying primary emotion. For example, I feel hurt when you yell at me. Or try to use another bonding, non-aggressive kind of word of your own. Wives, when you're listening to this, don't be defensive, don't feel attacked. Get out of your own head space and simply reflect or repeat to your husbands exactly what he said about his feelings. Get out of your own shoes and repeat. Then we'll move on to the second part, which is really important, the empathy that Mark's been talking about. Wives will respond after your husbands are finished, respond to him with an empathetic statement such as, that must be hard for you. For example, when I yell at you. I understand how you feel about this. So that he really can feel that you understand him and that you care about him. And that you're trying to connect with him rather than push him away, which is what anger would do. Then husbands, let the wives know how you feel when they do give you this empathy. You may even thank them if you feel a little better, or you may thank them for even trying to make you feel better if it didn't work that much for you. So in this way, all negative interactions and negative cycles could be changed into positive cycles in a marital couple, and we would have shalom bayit most of the time, not all of the time. Okay, so after these steps have been taken from husband to wife, we're going to switch roles the other way. And if you are all ready, you can turn to face each other if you have your partners here. If not, turn to face your imagined partners. And we are going to switch off the cameras. And anybody have any questions before we begin? Okay, so begin. So that interactional exercise is all done now, and you see how difficult it is probably. Hopefully some of you have started to learn something different. It's an ongoing practice. And Mark?
Thanks, Lindy. Here, in this exercise that Linda did with you, I moved forward because I'm sorry I don't have a very booming voice. And I know the people at the back can't hear me. So rather than have everybody move forward, I moved closer to you. In this exercise that Linda just did with you, you were there for each other. A kind of captive audience. Was that nice or was it uncomfortable? I imagine for some of you it was uncomfortable. You see, if we want to really feel that secure bond, you want to know that your spouse is there for you. The spouse has to be, these two words, available and responsive. That means, first of all, availability. You actually make time for your spouse if he or she wants to talk. Linda comes to tell me something. If I'm not doing something that's really time specific, then I will make time. I will make myself available for her. If I can't, I'll say to her, please keep that thought, and I promise I'll be back with you in 10 minutes. And I do. I am back in 10 minutes. Am I?
Most of the time.
One of the worst ways in which a person is not available is when there's a smartphone in the vicinity. And a smartphone should not be anywhere near you when you're trying to communicate with your spouse, near either of you. There's a great book that just came out that I saw today in today's store about living without a smartphone. Okay. One of the best cartoons that I ever saw was a guy sitting at the kitchen table reading his newspaper, and his wife is standing over him like this, and he's saying, "I am listening to you. That's why I'm reading the paper." So we want to be available, but this guy, he might be available, but is he responsive? Am I there for her? You've heard of presenteeism in the workplace. Somebody's there in body, but they're not functioning. So it's the same in marriage. I'm there, but I'm not responding. So in good communication, please make yourself available and responsive. The last how I'd like to talk about in communication is the danger of assumptions. When Linda does something that I'm uncomfortable with, you again, yes. My first thought is to criticize her. And because the only things that I'm really sure of in who she is, I know her personality. And I know her habits. So I make the assumption that she did what she did because of who she is, of who I know that she is.
Who he thinks she is.
Right. For example, if I know, this is totally theoretical, hypothetical. If I know I made it up. If I know she has difficulty in underground parking lots, and 3 times she scraped the car on a pillar, and I've begged her to be careful, and I come home and I see yet another scratch down the side of her car, what am I going to do? I'm going to come in and say, "Again, what's the matter with you? I've begged you to be careful. You just have no respect for the car." I'm blaming her trait, that part of her personality that I know about her, but I'm ignoring her state. I like these words because they rhyme. I'm ignoring her state, what actually happened today. I'm looking at her trait and I'm ignoring the state. I'm assuming it was because of her trait of carelessness. Maybe I should find out actually what was her state, the actual situation. Do you want to tell us what really happened? Okay. Where did you write it down? Here. Linda says, I can't imitate her accent. "Well, I was sitting at the stoplight, minding my own business, going over tonight's lecture in my mind when this 10-ton garbage truck comes scraping along the side of my car. I nearly died of fright. The driver of the truck was so upset at what he'd done. I have photos on my cell phone showing how he'd crossed into my lane for the insurance. That's the state. I made the assumption of where things were at with her. And it got me into deep trouble. So, assume nothing. Ask questions. So let me summarize tonight. We learned the importance of... Oh, there's something else I want you to do. We won't do it now, but write this down and take a look at it at home. Okay? Just Google this whole sentence.
I wrote it down before I saw your sign.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not about the nail.
YouTube.com. It's not about the nail.
If we have time, we could try to show it here tonight.
You want to look at it now? Okay, everybody get out your cell phones. Everybody, who hasn't got data on their cell phone?
We have Wi-Fi here.
We have Wi-Fi here. Okay, good.
Yes, but I keep asking what if I put the password?
I think it's...
For those people who don't have data, otherwise just share. Just share. Don't press on the button until I tell you to. Put that whole phrase into Google. Yeah.
There is one.
Okay, everybody ready?
Yes. There's two of them.
Oh my God, I was right.
The one that's 1 minute and 41 seconds.
Yeah. The first one that comes up, 1 minute and 41 seconds. Ready?
Wait.
Wait.
Should we tell him?
I'm going to count down.
It's 1:42.
Who's having trouble with it?
They actually put it on the screen here
Right. Oh,
for YouTube. You ready?
Okay. 3, 2, 1, press.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't!
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
Okay, you got it? Yeah. Okay, I think it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen as a teaching tool. It's perfect. Okay, so to summarize tonight, first of all, we learned the importance of knowing what you're thinking and feeling inside so that you can choose to say the best thing, not necessarily the first thing on your mind. We learned that you are driving your bus, not your passengers, who are your thoughts and feelings. We learned that the best way of communicating feelings is through I messages. I feel, not angry, but a vulnerable feeling when you did da-da-da-da-da. And we learn to respond to those I messages with empathy, recognizing and acknowledging the other's feelings in a non-critical, understanding way. We learn how important it is to be available to our spouse when they need us to talk or communicate or share or cry on a shoulder. And we need to be responsive to them to figure out what they need emotionally and actually give it to them. And lastly, we learn to be very careful to not make assumptions when we rush to judge our spouse. We must check the state before assuming it's all because of the trait. Now, go home and practice. And next week we'll talk about how everyone is different. Thank you very much.